Arcus, it's time for breakfast. Arcus's eyes flung open to the sound of his father calling out for him. He tossed the blankets off of him and sprung out of his bed. With his door already wide open, it was nothing for him to come bounding out and down the stairs leading away from his bedroom. Even at such the young age of 7, Arcus still could manage to make such a ruckus whenever he walked. He came thundering down the steps of his home, performing a large leap when he reached near the bottom, creating a loud bang. He stomped to the ground from his marvellous leap and skidded off towards the kitchens. He ran past the sitting room where his parents loved to sit and chit-chat with one another, and straight for where he could smell food being cooked. Even before he could open his eyes, the aroma of delicious breakfast could be smelled from miles away. There was pork sausages, eggs, toast, pancakes, and even waffles. It watered the boy's mouth and sent him faster towards his goal, but before he could reach there, he heard the booming voice of his father politely but sternly tell him not to run in the house, prompting Arcus to halt his pursuit immediately and shifted to that of a proper walk. Edited. That's better. Now come on in here and get you something to eat before your sisters eat it all up. Yes, sir, Arcus said as he rounded the corner and into the kitchen. It was a bright and sunny morning. The sun was up, beaming light into the cosy atmosphere, creating a glowing, warm environment with smiling faces that were happy to see Arcus as he arrived. There was his mother, who sat to the left of the large eating table. In her arms were his twin sisters, Abigail and Athena. To the left of them was Amina, who had already been digging into her plate of food before anyone could stop her. And to then there was Vivian. Arcus's cheery demeanour was quickly replaced with that of spite towards seeing the oldest of his sisters. He scolded at the very notion of her being there, and it showed. Despite his disposition of her being there, Vivian also smiled at him and greeted him with her toothy grin, the front of her teeth missing, so whenever she spoke with a lisp. "Hi, Arcus. Good morning. Did you sleep okay?" Arcus said nothing as he took his seat before Vivian, staring at her sorely. Their father sat at the head of the table towards his right, but he was busy preparing a hearty breakfast for the family, something he'd do almost every morning without fail. It was almost a tradition for the family to get together early in the morning and start their day with a good meal provided by the helm of the house. Upon seeing Vivian, Arcus had forgotten his manners, something that his mother would curtly remind him of. "Arcus, say something to your sister. She's greeting you. And stop staring at her like that. You're being rude." Arcus's hard stare into his sister was quickly broken by the sharp tone of his mother. He sunk into his seat and mumbled an apology. Vivian giggled. "That's okay, Arcus. I love you." Vivian jumped down from her seat and ran over to where Arcus sat, giving him a hug before returning to her chair. Arcus visibly winced and cringed away from the hug, but he could do nothing with his mother watching. Vivian had not been a planned part of the family. In fact, she was not from the Nighthood house at all. She had been brought in by Arcus's father's sister, who was of a Dovian descendants. That meant that she had Dovian blood in her, very different from the Volcari in terms of looks and behaviour, thus deeming her not worthy of knighthood status, according to Arcus. She arrived at their door at the age of 3 when Arcus was 5. Her father had just died in the battle against the Kai, and the mother could not take care of her by herself due to sickness and grief. So the knighthood took her in and treated her as their own, all save for Arcus. He knew that the new arrival of his newly acquired sister was nothing but trouble. While everyone else was charmed by her cuteness, Arcus saw right through the guise and knew her to be someone he could not correlate with, for she held a bad personality that often and always rubbed him the wrong way. Even at a young age, he could see this in the young Dovian, and whether or not Vivian knew it, she still believed that she was the apple of everyone's eyes, including the one person that hated her. While the family ate, they would talk with one another. Mother Nighthood would ask her children how their day was prior, and they would always cheerfully answer with varying responses of their daily duties of play. Arcus would tell of the stories he read in the books his father gave to him, how his adventures inside those pages took him to places he had never been to before. Vivian would give long, lengthily tales of what her dolls would speak to her about. The amount of detail she would put into her stories was astonishing to hear, even for Arcus, and he began to wonder whether or not her dolls were actually alive. Amina talked about the usual, which happened to be food. She would talk about what she wanted to eat, what she ate the day before, and what she was eating now. Food was always on her mind, it seemed. During their conversation, the twin were often quiet and calm. Nighthood was an extremely good mother. She had all of the qualities a mother needed: patience, dedication, and love for her children. Arcus always admired his mother for this, and it showed. Whenever she needed help with something, he was there to provide. Even when his father was around, he would be there to give her the attention and company. She would have to shoo him away on some days when he would be underneath her, wanting nothing more than her company. He was a real mother's boy and wasn't ashamed of it. Arcus's life was as a normal boykin could have. Despite the fact that neither him nor his sisters could ever leave the house due to the dangers their kind brought, as well as their surrounding while living within the bleak forest that was Black Tower Woods, or the Cryptic Forest, Arcus was happy. However, his happiness would be taken away from him when a great darkness would be welcomed into their home. There was a knock on the door as the family was just finishing up with breakfast. Confused and baffled, the Nighthood looked alarmed at each other before the head of the household told them all to still themselves and to remain quiet as he went for the door. Doing as they were told, the family remained silent, watching the herald calmly wipe his mouth and placed his breakfast napkin down before pushing his chair back and walking out of the kitchens. Arcus remembers hearing the heavy thudding of his father's footsteps as he walked to the door. The gentle but hefty cladding of his shined shoes clicking against the hardwood flooring was instilled in his memory. The creaking of the front door could be heard as it was opened, then silence. Afterwards, Arcus could feel there being talking between his father and another male, for he could feel the sensation of their voice rumble throughout the entire house, vibrating the very foundation. That was always the case with his father. He had a deep voice for someone so tall and lanky of a stature. Arcus's ears burned as he tried to listen in on what and whom his father spoke to, but all he could make out were mumbles. He was so enthralled in his attempt to snoop in on his father's business, he failed to notice his mother giving him a scornful eye before she would give him a forceful nudge on his shoulder, breaking him out of his concentration. "Arcus, do not snoop on your father's business. If you're that curious, just ask him when he returns back to the table." Arcus slumped in his chair, his little wings drooped. "Yes, mother," he replied obediently and played with his food. His father did return back to the kitchens, but he had company along with him. It was a Min. He was dressed in dark clothing with red tint to them and had wide, large shoulders. He wore a hat over his face, but Arcus could see that his eyes also held a tint of red. He remembered feeling something quite off about the Min and did not like it. His father introduced the wide-shouldered Min as Mordecai. He was proclaimed to be an uncle. Arcus stared the Min down long and hard. His feelings over this stranger would not go away even when his father caught him staring and scolded him with just a look. Arcus tore his eyes away and bore a hole into his unfinished breakfast. Suddenly he wasn't so hungry anymore. The Min took off his large-brimmed hat and bowed his head to the rest of the Nighthood family, who all greeted him warmly. His sisters all looked at their mother before they would jump from the table and bum-brush the stranger, bombarding him with questions. Questions such as where he came from, why did he wear such funny clothing when the weather was spring and so nice out, yet he wore heavy clothing as if it were cold out. The Min named Mordecai laughed at all of this and answered the curious questions. He was a knighthood, same as them. He was seeking refuge from the war with the Kai, which had been begun to die down since the middle of the year, yet it was still a prevalent event for any and all Volcari. He claimed that he managed to escape the war and found the House of Knighthood through messages from the Herald of the Home via Raven. Arcus caught a look given to his father by his mother. She did not like the idea of their father sending out messages of where they lived, and Arcus understood this to an agreement. Yet here was this strange Min, standing in their kitchen, smiling with such a toothy expression, and Arcus swore he could see a glint in those red gems in his head. Mr. Nighthood pronounced that the uncle would be staying with them for a while, as the war between the Kai and Volcari was put to an end. This worried Arcus, but he could say nothing, for his father's word was final. For a week, Mordecai stayed with the Nighthood. He had a room upstairs side by side with Arcus's bedroom, the room where they were told never to enter. Arcus wondered himself what lay inside that room. All he knew was that his father was quite adamant on the children having never entered the room. Arcus knew that there was something or someone who they were not supposed to see, but he knew. He could feel it in his bones that a presence was inside of the room. No one was ever seen leaving nor entering the room, but he knew that someone was in there. And now, with this Mordecai person staying with them, the presence inside the room grew stronger. While Mordecai stayed with the Nighthood, he himself had become scarce when it came to being seen. He, along with the presence, were locked up away inside of his room, doing God's knows what in there. Arcus couldn't understand how someone could be cooped up inside such a small space, but not even to come out for food or drink. At night, however, he could hear the shuffling and mumbling of someone outside his door. One night he would crack open the door to find that it was his uncle, who looked to be sneaking around, attempting not to make noise. Arcus watched Mordecai shamble down the stairs and straight to the sitting room, where both his parents liked to sit at night. They often sat in the sitting room and chatted with one another while the rest slept. Arcus knew this because he himself had a penchant for sneaking out of his bed and snooping on his parents. He was always fascinated at the sheer love his parents shared between each other, how they would talk to each other and treat each other with such affectionate devotion. It made Arcus want to have a partner himself and find love. He was far too young for such a thing, but because of his parents, he knew what love looked like. Mordecai knocked on the door of the sitting room and was allowed in by Mr. Nighthood. The warm lighting of the room could be seen briefly before the sliding double doors closed it off. Arcus stood still, straining his ears to hear what was going on inside of the sitting room. He dared not leave his room out of fear of being caught, but his burning senses screamed at him to do so. But he would not move and remained in his room, listening in to the rumbling voices of his father and uncle once more. At first it was quiet, then grew in volume as his father raised his voice. Now his father was known to be a very patient and understanding Min. He would give the very coat off his back if it meant that it would help another person, so for him to raise his voice in such a manner alarmed Arcus, who gasped and held tightly to the doorknob of his room. He bit back his lips and awaiting for more talking, but there was only silence before there was light coming from the sitting room once more. Mordecai exited the room, but did not close the doors. His heavy thudding of his shoes could be heard walking towards the kitchens. Arcus peered his head out and awaited for the sight of Mordecai to be seen before he would retreat back into his room. Mordecai re-entered the sitting room, but did not close the doors off. This was how Arcus gave Arcus the door of opportunity to listen in on the conversation between his father and this stranger. "I just don't understand why you would keep him in that dingy room, brother. You could do so much with his powers. It's unbelievable that you won't tap into it." "I've told you before, Mordecai, I am not interested in using our father for the sake of my own interests. He's in that room for a reason. That is all that I will tell you, and that is all I will say on the matter." "I knew you would feel that way, brother. I did not mean to anger. Here, I made you and Bethany some tea to simmer you down." "Ah, thank you, Mordecai. That's just what we needed. I hope you do understand our situation when it comes to our father." "Oh yes, brother, I understand completely, which is why I won't press the matter any further." "Good. Thank you, Mordecai. This does not change our standing between each other, I hope. You are still welcomed within these walls." "I thank you, Alastar, and no, it changes nothing of our relationship. I am grateful that you have welcomed me into your home, a mere stranger to you up until this point. Well, with the war going on and our kind pushed to the brink of extinction, we have to keep together, brother." "I agree." There was a moment of silence more. so much so that Arcus himself felt uncomfortable. He began to shift from his spot near his bedroom door, ear to the gap of the door. He licked his lips and bit them back. His body continued to scream at him to move, but he remained. The silence of the sitting room was becoming unbearable for the boy to stand, and he was pushed to finally make a move. He tiptoed out of his room and slunk down the steps straight for the sitting room situated on the left side. He moved quickly and quietly to the double door and leaned in, attempting to get something, anything heard from the room within, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Suddenly the double doors opened, and standing there was Mordecai. He seemed to not notice the boy before him, his red jewels for eyes gleaming in the darkness. There was no longer a warm strand of light coming from the sitting room where his parents loved to sit, only darkness. This baffled Arcus, and something deep inside him shivered inward then out. He looked up at the wide Min who finally noticed him, those red eyes locking on his blue hues. The Min smiled, a smile that cut through the dark like a beam of light, but this light was riddled with the same bleakness that blanketed his home, Arcus felt. That toothy smile that made Arcus's spine chill and the hairs of his arms raise. Suddenly the darkness was creeping over him, threatening to consume him. Arcus was told to flee, but he was stilled by fear. Mordecai finally spoke. "Shh! Do not disturb your parents! What's going on, huh? Are my parents okay?" Arcus moved to look past the large Min, who seemed so much taller up close than Arcus expected. He wasn't as tall as his father, but his large stature and wide shoulders gave him an overwhelming image of something that put fear into Arcus, like a monster. Arcus did manage to see inside the sitting room before his uncle could close it off. Like all Volcari, his eyesight was not particularly well in the darkness, but because of their wild genes, he was able to see enough. As the double doors were closing, he caught a glimpse of his father's hand resting on the arm of his favoured chair. There was a gleam coming from the light of the lunas, shining down on the family heirloom that was his ring finger. Arcus felt something sink inside his body, something that died and stayed within that room, shut off by the monster. He made no fuss nor said anything as he was ushered back to his room and into his bed. As he climbed in, he looked toward the doorway. There, standing there, was his uncle, his body filling up the entire frame, like some imposing imposter, looking into the boy's room with looming red eyes. Arcus rolled away from the sight and rested on his side, his eyes peering out the window and staring longingly at the half-faced Luna. He flinched when he heard the booming voice of the monster, wishing him a good night's sleep.